On April 19, 1861, a week after the bombardment of Fort Sumter that marked the outbreak of the Civil War, Lincoln announced that the ports of all the ceded states from South Carolina through to Texas would be blockaded. Lincoln said in his proclamation, "Advisable to set on foot a blockade of all ports within the United States aforementioned, in pursuance of the laws of the United States and of the laws of the nations in such case provided." This proclamation called for the blockade of 3,500 miles of coastline, stretching from Texas through the Gulf of Mexico, around Florida, covering the coast of Georgia, and up to the Bay of Virginia. Lincoln chose to blockade the South instead of closing the ports of the South. This had global connections. When he did that, he recognized the South as a belligerent in the eyes of European nations. This gave them the ability, in the eyes of international and maritime law, to trade with the South in guns, cannons, goods, and also to offer loans. If the ports were closed and not blockaded, then the Union would not have had the right to stop, search, or seize neutral countries' ships it suspected of violating the blockade. In respect to production, distribution, and consumption, the South was at a disadvantage. In 1857, Hinton Helper published The Impending Crisis of the South, in which he said, "It is a fact well known to every intelligent Southerner that we are compelled to go to the North for almost every article of utility and endowment, from matches, shoe pegs, and paintings up to cotton mills and steamships, and that we are dependent on Northern capitalists for the means necessary to build our railroads, canals, and other public improvements." People in the North were also aware of the limitations in production, distribution, and consumption that the South faced. Winfield Scott, also called Old Man of the Army or Old Fuss and Feathers, suggested the Anaconda Plan. This basically mirrored the proclamation that Lincoln had earlier made regarding the blockade. The intention of the blockade was not simply to block off the South from international trade, but also to cut it off down the Mississippi, stopping its western states from supplying cattle and horses. Also to stop international trade of cotton, which was a major source of capital for the southern states. The South tried to circumvent the blockade mainly from two ports. One was Havana, Cuba, the other was Nassau in the Bahamas. They did this by having larger ships drop off cargo at those two ports that were then loaded into small, fast, darkly painted ships. These ships used anthracite coal, which didn't produce smoke. They were shallow draft and made for speed, which limited cargo, but helped them to evade Union patrols. They were not armed or armored, as this was seen as slowing them down. Most were crewed by British officers. This occurred because British officers would be returned to their port of call, whereas Confederate officers would be arrested. The cargo of the ships was not used exclusively on arms. The cargo of the ship also included perfumes, hats, and other expensive consumer goods that fetched a high price in the Confederacy. Stephen A. Douglas said that all the cargoes of the ships had to be split 50-50 between consumer goods and cargoes for the Confederacy. Due to the blockade, there was also a jump forward in science and technology, the largest of which was the introduction of iron-sided fighting vessels. These depictions are of the Battle of Hampton Road, or of the Battle of the Merrimack and the Monitor. This battle was the first battle between iron-sided fighting vessels. It came to a draw as neither side was able to inflict enough damage on the other. The British took notice of this battle. On April 5, 1862, the Illustrated London News said in an article titled "The Naval Revolution," "Is it indeed true that the naval supremacy of England has passed away like a mere unsubstantial exultation under the light of that memorable Saturday, March 8, 1862? It was but a few weeks ago that English journalists of the highest character and position were complacently announcing that we should, in the event of war, at once sweep the seas of all American shipping." Union naval might, the Emancipation Proclamation, combined with continued Union victory, stopped Europeans from joining the war on the South Side. David Farragut was one of the Union's naval heroes of the war. He engineered the victory at New Orleans, in which a fleet of Union ships ran past the Confederate forces in taking the lightly defended city. This victory in April 1862 was very important because it led to a victory at Vicksburg in which the Union was able to secure the Mississippi, stopping resupply from Texas and Arkansas and other western states in the Confederacy to eastern states. Another major victory was the August 5, 1864 capture of Mobile Bay. This victory secured the last deep-water port that the South still held, and stopped almost any efforts to resupply from the outside. The blockade was successful in destroying the economy of the South and cost few lives, either Confederate or Union. General Lee's army was starved. In 1861, 1 in 10 blockade runners made it through. By 1864, that number had fallen to 1 in 3. This starved the Confederate Army, left their soldiers without valuable resources that they needed to win. The blockade was a major factor in the North's eventual victory.